viewer recommendation. Thank you, Catherine Wolf. This is That Dang Dad, who, I'm going to give him a like on this video. There you go. This is That Dang Dad with a video called How Being a Cop Broke My Brain. And I want to give you a heads up, it is going to be very awkward when I transition, but I'm going to try anyway.
Welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil, and tonight I want to return to a topic I haven't done a video on in a while: law enforcement. If you're new to the channel, you should know that I used to be a police officer in a pretty rowdy part of California. In the years since then, though, I've become a police and prison abolitionist, meaning I believe that the entire concept of police forces and prisons is not reformable, and it must be replaced with something that's more compassionate, more just, more committed to dignity and meeting human needs.
Just want to say, broad strokes, I'm on board. We're in the first few seconds of the video, but broad strokes, yes, I'm on board. A ground-up transformation, absolutely.
I'll put a link in the description
say.
below if you want to see me do a deeper dive on that topic. Tonight, though, I want to set aside the academic texts and the philosophy and all that nerd shit, and I want to get personal about how my time in law enforcement really fucked my brain up. Tonight we're going to be talking about state violence and some of the nasty stuff that cops see in the line of duty, so if you're not in the mood for blood and guts and man's inhumanity to man...
Oh, I have so many stories. Maybe another stream. Maybe a little bit in this stream. But I got some gross cop stories. In like stuff that we'll get to.
I want to skip this one tonight. Anyway, there's nothing cops love more than captivating an audience with a war story, so I'll start with one of mine. So there I was, Saturday night, M4 rifle in hand, monitoring the perimeter of a housing complex in the middle of a neighborhood. Our gang unit had been tracking an armed and dangerous gangster wanted for murder, and they'd seen him enter the middle property of a triplex where his family was hiding him. We quietly evacuated the two end properties. We prepared...
Just real quick, I want to compliment him on his editing style and say that I will probably take a page out of his book. I've been trying to figure out how to do a nice visual thing. I like that a lot.
To make a dynamic entry, as they say. This is the police, come out with your hands up, no answer, in go the flashbangs, and go the tear gas. After a moment, the gang unit radioed that the gangster had climbed up into the attic of the triplex, which was accessible to the two end units. I was tasked with standing in the doorway of the south unit in case he tried to sneak out that way. I was reminded that he was armed, dangerous, and had already killed. So there I stood as the gang unit began to throw more and more tear gas up into the attic, waiting to see if this guy was going to drop down right in front of me. And I did what I'd been trained to do. I visualized shooting him in the chest until he stopped moving. Over and over and over and over again. I pictured him crashing through the ceiling. I pictured him sneaking around a corner. I pictured him running at me. I pictured him shooting at me. I pictured him wounding me. And every time I pictured firing until the threat had been eliminated. I have no idea how many times I annihilated this guy in my mind palace. 40, 50 times. And it's not because I hated this guy or really wanted to score my first kill on the job. It was because I wasn't quite sure I could actually do it. I was taking a page out of Dave Grossman's training, and I was psyched.
That is so fascinating. It's that he wasn't sure if he could do it that made him hyper-focus on that part of the training. That's really interesting. Good recommendation, Catherine.
Picking myself up and convincing myself that yes, I could kill someone if I had to. After all, he was armed, he was dangerous, and he'd already killed before. What options did I have? Ultimately, blinded and choking on tear gas, he fell through the roof of the middle unit directly in front of our canine unit. Did you know dogs are not incapacitated by tear gas? The gangster and I both learned this right about the same time, and it was a bad night for him.
Oh,
After
no.
all that, I put my gear back in my cop car, took a quick drink of water, and resumed my shift. Off to go break up loud parties, referee marital disputes, and chase...
I haven't seen the video. He might touch on this in a moment. I do want to say, so often people forget that about a cop. If you have a cop that is interacting with you for some reason, and it's a relatively innocent reason, like the classic, you were speeding, you were going 15 miles an hour over and you have a headlight out and you blew right past him. It's a neighborhood. He pulls you over. A lot of times it's easy to forget that it's entirely plausible that like 45 minutes ago, this guy might have had to pull a drunk off her kid as she was beating her kid in public. Like just some mind-blowing evil that they just encountered. And they might have a little bit of that wrath still in them. So that when you, then in a neighborhood, go 15 miles an hour faster than you should have, they're like, does nobody care about kids? God damn it. And then, just saying, it's just like any other job. If we're not doing it, we generally don't know the full context. And I am not trying to go out of my way to apologize for bad behavior or unprofessional behavior, but it's worthy of consideration.
So 18s on a would-be beer run, all that violent energy I'd been working with, all that visualization of hurting and killing people, gone. On to the next call. I tell you this story because it's emblematic of much of my law enforcement career. When I first started out, I was criticized for being meek, timid, too slow to show dominance out in the field. I was taught that showing that kind of weakness on calls would make me a target for attack. I was shown hundreds of videos of cops being killed on routine calls for service by assailants who didn't really look like killers. At the same time, on my days off, I was training in Krav Maga alongside many other cops and military veterans. Krav is extremely aggressive and it very often touches on mindset. We trained on how to fight a carjacker inside your own car. We trained on last-ditch techniques to disarm somebody who was trying to shoot you execution style. One night, the instructor made us fight, cradling a baby doll in our arms to simulate our own child. The point was that you never knew what kind of awful situation might be coming your way. So over time, I internalized this message. At any given time, someone out there is going to hurt you if you're not ready to hurt them first. If you let your guard down for even a second, they'll kill you. In the police business, this is how we talk about officer safety. The most respected veteran officers that I worked with were the ones that were pulling young guys back from running around blind corners. They were the ones saying, hey, did you search that dumpster before we turn our back on it? You got the sense that they had seen things and that they knew how to keep themselves safe. And you got the sense that the big thing you can do to protect yourself on the job is to mentally prepare for that day. And since you never knew what form the attack would take, it's best to just run scenarios in your head constantly, building those mental pathways so that when it finally does happen, you'll know exactly what to do.
Worth pointing out that a lot of the folks, it sounds like, that he worked with, all right, worth pointing out that we shipped this over to Iraq. Then we specialized it in Iraq for dealing with insurgents. And we brought it back home in its new form. So policing, I don't think it was, it's not suggesting that it was good before the Iraq War, but there was a definite, and this is when I had dipped my toe in considering that as a profession. But even I, as a wee community college student, got a sense of the changes that were imported back to us after we had exported them to Iraq, from Iraq after we had first exported them to Iraq. And a lot of the folks he's talking about, the old pros that were showing him the ropes, that would have been their bread and butter. But the problem is we're then looking at our civilian population the same way we're looking at a country that we had invaded. That's a problem.
So that's what I trained my brain to do on duty. I drove around and I imagined. What if a guy with a gun popped out of the trunk of that car over there and started shooting at me? What if I saw a man with a knife running down that alley?
What if that shoebox is an IED?
What would I do if a plane crashed into City Hall? Over time, my brain began to do this off-duty as well. I wouldn't sit in restaurants with my back to the front door so that I could monitor everybody coming in. I walked through mall parking lots with my head on a swivel. I stared down people who looked out of place just so they'd known that I'd seen them. I was constantly in a state of vigilance. Not concern, just vigilance. My Krav instructor used the color code system to talk about emotional states, white, yellow, orange, red, black. And he used to say that you should never leave the house without being at least code yellow, that you should never be totally relaxed in public.
That's a guy that takes his profession so seriously that you shouldn't take that guy seriously.
And I never was. And to this day, I never am. It's been a long time since my cop days now, but this hypervigilance has never left me. And what at one time felt like a survival tool I was proud of, now just makes me exhausted and probably exhausting to be around. I hate leaving my house. I don't like going out and doing things with lots of people. If it's too loud and crowded somewhere, I don't feel like I'm in control. I don't feel safe.
Catherine, you're giving me a video that's gonna make me have to talk about some things with a therapist. Recognizing some similarities here that don't sound healthy when I hear it reflected back.
Sometimes I dissociate a little bit just as a treat. But even worse than the hypervigilance, the thing I can't turn off is my imagination. Not only did law enforcement train me to imagine 1,000 different horrible events, law enforcement involved my participation in 1,000 different horrible events. I've seen bodies riddled with bullets. I've seen stabbing victims crawling through their own blood. I've seen car accidents render the driver unrecognizable. And I've seen children horrifically abused and even killed.
Oof. I'm going to leave that last one alone because I'm going to try to keep it a little bit lighter. But let's talk about some grim stuff. I got a sister who was a cop for a while. Got a brother who was a cop. Got a father that was a cop in a different era. The stories that are the most gruesome also came from a background where the standard way you get your teeth cut in the industry is going out and doing stories at the side of a road where a horrible crash has just happened. The most gruesome fathomable is the car accident stories. Simply because of physics. You are then dealing with a level of physics that does things to a human body that often healthy folks don't imagine. And the entire point of this aside is simply this: for God's sake, wear your seatbelt. Don't drink and drive. Just those two things. If this channel accomplishes nothing else but getting one person to wear their seatbelt and not drink and drive, I'll be satisfied.
So even now, long after my cop days, my brain will conjure up unbidden hey, what if this happened? Hey, what if a home invader breaks in and takes you hostage? What if your partner drives off a bridge? What if there's a mass shooting at this theater? All kinds of stuff. And for a while, I could tell myself I was just being prepared. Mass shootings happen all the time in the United States. Why shouldn't I mentally prepare? I wrote this line after the Buffalo shooting and before the Uvalde shooting. It wasn't until my daughter was born that I started to realize that maybe actually what I was doing wasn't normal. All new parents experience the fears and the what ifs, but I spent the first year and a half of my daughter's life in an almost daily battle with my own mind. It was a constant onslaught of the most horrible what if scenarios you can possibly imagine. So bad I won't even describe them to you. Every night I had to fight my brain to go to sleep. Breathing exercises, meditations, rain sounds, sleep stories, melatonin, CBD, anything that would just shut the projector off. It's a minor miracle I didn't end up abusing alcohol very much during that time, because some nights a nice big glass of scotch was a really easy way to tell my brain to just shut the fuck up. I was looking into therapy at one point, and then COVID hit, and between that and budget stuff, I basically just gave up on that idea for the time being. After some research, I ended up buying a self-guided CBT workbook. Not that kind, the other kind. And doing exercises in that for a while. And believe it or not, that actually kind of helped. I don't know if it was just feeling like I had some kind of outlet to work on this stuff, or whether I just got less anxious over time as my daughter stayed healthy and happy. But I'm in a much better place than I was 2 years ago. I'll even give you one of my tricks in case you need it. When I catch my thoughts start to race down a bad path and I realize that I'm rehearsing for tragedy, I'll say to myself out loud, "You don't need to rehearse right now. If this ever happens, you'll know what to do." And if the thought is really atrocious, sometimes I will say to myself out loud, "This is a stupid fucking thing to obsess over. We're going to think about a different topic right now." Something about saying it out loud just makes for a nice thought pattern reboot. I don't know why it works for me, but it does. So why am I telling you all this? Is it to generate sympathy for cops? Absolutely not. ACAB forever. Is it to dissuade young people from going into law enforcement? No, but I'll take it. I think the reason that I wanted to talk about this tonight was as a way of explaining why so many cops behave the way that they do, and why they seem to feel a sense of entitlement about being exonerated after, say, shooting an unarmed person or...
He's making a really, really interesting point. But I hope he explains ACAB there. I have never really understood that at all. The people that say ACAB, ACAB. Doesn't make any sense to me. I've also never understood the people that suggest to lefties that they shouldn't go into law enforcement, of which this guy appears to be both. Obviously, he just said he was. I hope he explains that a little bit more. I have a critique I'd like to offer, or at least not even a critique, my opinion on why I don't think that is a good thing to do. But that said, this video is fascinating, and the point he's making right now is really insightful. That sense of entitlement to forgiveness for cops that have, in my opinion, betrayed the people they were meant to protect by being over-violent. Fascinating. Let's let him finish.
Refusing to run into a school to save children. I am not the only person to have their brain broken by law enforcement, and many of the people to whom that happened are still cops. That hypervigilance, those obsessive thoughts about danger around every corner, that's part of law enforcement culture. It's part of the training. It's part of the mentoring. It's woven into the DNA of how cops operate every day. That's why there's this almost unbridgeable gulf between a normal person who says something like, "Why did you punch that guy 37 times just for having his hands in his pockets?" and the cop who replies, "Because I didn't know what was in there. It could have been a knife or a gun or a jar of battery acid that he was going to throw in my face. I didn't want to take the chance." I guarantee you that cop was at a seminar one time where some old head was telling a war story about his partner Bob Sacamano, who actually did get battery acid thrown in his face.
And also, in some cases, literal war stories. Literally talking about policing Fallujah. Worth noting.
There are approximately 900,000 police officers in the United States, and I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of them were trained like I was and have the same mental pathways that I have. That's a lot of unarmed, unaccountable people running around fantasizing about being executed in the streets every day.
Armed.
Yeah, this may inspire some sympathy in you for those cops. I don't think it's a coincidence that cops endure this kind of abusive working mode and then turn to alcohol abuse and even more notoriously, child abuse and intimate partner abuse. Yes, many people who are already abusive enter law enforcement because the profession protects abusers, but I do think that the job can, over time, make people much more abusive than they were when they started, both through the training and through the peer pressure. Counseling and therapy are totally stigmatized in law enforcement. If your department finds out that you're receiving mental health treatment, you risk missing out on special assignments and promotions for being unstable. So everyone fighting these demons is fighting alone. But I'm not arguing for sympathy, and I'm not asking you to empathize with anyone. Instead, all of this is yet another reason why I am a police abolitionist and why I believe that the profession, as it exists today, cannot be reformed into something better and must instead be replaced. The hundreds of thousands of cops with these hyper-vigilant, alarmist thought patterns are not going to be receptive to being disarmed and trained not to kill. Hell, when I was a cop, even in my later nice cop years, I wouldn't have been receptive to being part of an unarmed community service role. I would have balked at any training that said that police should err on the side of not killing someone during a tense, uncertain, rapidly evolving situation. I would have told you that it was dangerous to dissuade cops from killing because it means that they will hesitate when that day comes. Any training or policy that put civilian lives ahead of police officer lives would have been killed off by a massive mobilization of angry officers. Among the 900,000 cops out there, are there caring, compassionate officers who just want their community to be safe? Sure. Would some of them make amazing community care responders and conflict mediators and mental health crisis counselors? Absolutely. But these officers are not driving department policy. They're certainly not driving federal policy, and they are not leading the culture of modern American law enforcement. They exist, but they are not representative of the whole of policing. And when you call 911, there's a low likelihood that you're going to get officer friendly instead of Sergeant Dick rifle. From the frequent police murders of unarmed civilians to the now frequent refusal of police to defend school children, it's painfully obvious that the American officer safety mindset is a clear and present threat to everyone in this country. Anytime you're within 20 feet of a cop, you are in danger, both from their overactive imagination and from their total systemic insulation from consequences.
Wholeheartedly agree. That right there is my biggest beef with American law enforcement currently. The police themselves are a danger to American citizens. The people they are policing, the people they are supposed to be protecting. They are, if there was another group that behaved the way American police do, I would call the police on that group. That part, or that assessment, I should say, I wholeheartedly agree with.
You should never feel safe when the cops arrive, unless you're rich and white. Anyway.
Thank you for
weirdly
that
personal one tonight. What do you think? I'm sure those of you with CPTSD can probably relate to the racing thoughts and hypervigilance. What techniques work for you? Also, how do you like these little low-key, kind of sloppy vlogs as opposed to my more researched, more complex topics?
That goes for this too. All right. Okay, overall thoughts. And I'm curious to hear yours in the comments as well. In fact, let's open up those comments. Yeah, I think we didn't get to the ACAB. And we didn't get to really what, in my opinion, is the most important thing, which is, if not that, what? Although he did touch on it a little bit, a different type of officer, an unarmed officer. I think overall that was fascinating. What an insight into what is going on with these guys. Excellent for keeping in mind. I will probably be playing that clip in an abridged form again later as part of a video essay. I would say, first reaction, what you can do in your town, particularly if it's a big enough town, you have the ability to massively affect how the police work is done. I would say, particularly if you are the sort of person that used to say, defund the police, switch gears and say, fund new police. In your town, try to get an unarmed officer as a position which exists and is not a position of shame. Like, oh, Johnny can't control his GD gun, so we're not letting him carry one. You got to go out there and yada, yada. No. Officer friendly is what we should make. We should do pilot programs, just like there were pilot programs with UBIs in towns. Pilot programs for reasonable police, I think, is a great thing to do. And to greater effect, it can be an example for the rest of the nation. If I'm saying it here, it is almost guaranteed that somebody else thought of it years ago and it's been done already. So I will look into that. and I'll look into how it went. But first reaction, that's what I would suggest doing, for sure. In your town, go to the city council, say, look, we don't want armed people looking like they're ready to invade Poland showing up if we had a fender bender. I don't want to risk a gun being pointed at me if I'm calling to complain about my neighbor playing music too loud. I don't want to risk a gun being pointed at my neighbor in that scenario. I would like a section of the police to be unarmed that I can call and request an unarmed officer. I think that's the way to go. And I think, let's have a gander. I think that, what was it? I've just left it. Killing me. Oh, Jake, come on. Well, I think that dad, or whatever his name was, I do apologize, is someone I'm going to be looking at a lot more in the future. Great find.